to the History Slam podcast from ActiveHistory.ca. Here's your host, Sean Graham.
Thank you, Adam. Welcome to the History Slam, everybody. I am Sean Graham, coming at you today nearly live. We are in Ottawa, Ontario, continuing our series of episodes from Congress 2015. And this one was actually recorded just after the Canadian Historical Association annual meeting. And it was part of a launch of a new part of a popular series, the Canadian Mysteries series. They launched their new mystery, which was the Franklin exhibition. So I wandered down to Library and Archives Canada to talk to the coordinators of the project, John Lutz and Ruth Sandwell. And we recorded this just before the launch of the Franklin exhibition mystery. And you will notice in the episode there is some ambient noise where we're speaking. We're talking in the converted meeting room, which is now sort of a lunchroom at Library and Archives Canada. So there's a nice hum of one of the vending machines there, and as well as some noise from people coming in and out of the room. And we apologize for that, but there was a bit of a time crunch in the recording of the episode. It was sort of a last-minute thing that we put together really quickly. So that is why we ended up in that room. But despite that ambient noise, I think this is a really fun episode. So here they are, Ruth Sandwell and John Lutz. First, if one of you, just sort of how did this project start and where did the idea come from?
The idea started when John and I were both graduate students, in fact, around 1995, and we were, for the first time, teaching. As doctoral students, we were teaching, and we're really surprised that the teaching that was going on inside the university was the same as it had always been, which is somebody standing at the front of the room lecturing. But as graduate students, we were really aware, because of our own research, which was so interesting and vital and fascinating and open-ended, we just realized, how could we translate that into something that the students could use in the classroom? So we came up with the idea. We had an overlapping area of research, which was the west coast of British Columbia. And we came up with the idea of teaching history as mystery, coming up with a really good mystery and then providing students with the primary documents, the evidence, so that they could solve it themselves. So instead of just a lecture format with the teacher telling the students the answer, then the students could actually engage in the process of doing history themselves.
So it's really more of an investigative technique rather than simply absorbing information from the front.
That's right.
It's making, the disjuncture that Ruth identified is the disjuncture between being a passive recipient of history and doing history. And so we wanted to give students a chance to do history. When you sit in a classroom and somebody tells you what I think of as kind of a pre-digested kind of pablum version of history, you don't acquire any of the skills of doing history. So, and it's also boring. So we thought, why not give the students both the tools and intriguing mysteries that they might want to go and solve? And it was sort of by happenstance that Ruth had been working on the history of Salt Spring Island as a study of rural history, and found that 3 black men were murdered on the island in the space of 18 months, and a native man was really quickly hanged. But she had her doubts based on who ended up with the property and various other things. So she came to me and said, what do you think? Is there something more here? And we put it together, and we trialed it on a group of historical professors who were at a conference. Right. And they came. We gave them all the same evidence, and they came to different conclusions about who the murderer was. And we knew we had a good mystery there and a good teaching tool.
Right. Well, but something like that, though, where there isn't necessarily like a set answer, does that maybe confuse sometimes students? And because I think there's this perception amongst students that history is very fact-based. Yeah. And, there's one answer all the time, but as we know, that's not the case. But
well, as John and I found when we launched the first website, it was very new at the time. It was 1997. When we first started this project, we hadn't even heard of the World Wide Web. Anyway, when we launched the site and started getting requests from teachers, and we didn't know how it would be received, and we designed it for a university-level classroom, but we had hundreds of high school teachers and even elementary school teachers contacting us and saying, how do you do this? So we began developing some educational materials to help them. But in the process of doing that, and this is just when I was finishing up my doctorate, in the process of doing that, I realized that there was a whole new movement in history education, especially at the secondary level, about engaging students in the process of doing history and getting away from the idea that history is a fact, as you said, or that it's a set of conclusions, and instead there's a huge, or the beginnings of a movement of which we became, I think I can say we became an important part in Canada, at least, of changing that idea and saying to students and to teachers, no, actually there is no omniscient narrator in history. All it is evidence and argument. And that's all any historian can do. You can do it better or you can do it worse. But here are the tools, and you can do it. And yes, it is disturbing for some students. They really want a fixed answer. And, unfortunately, that's not the real world, past and present. So.
And the use of mysteries is really interesting because, you could come to these similar things with almost anything, right? But the use of mysteries... is that for the hook part of it and to get people interested in a way that, say, the history of broadcasting, as I use my own as an example, the history of broadcasting may not have that entry point for students to really get invested in this?
For sure, but, I think we make the mistake of telling students history rather than asking them what happened, because I think you can turn anything into a mystery. Who killed the CBC? So our mysteries range from the first one, the murder mystery, through to where was the Viking homeland in North America, Vinland, which is not it's a mystery, but the evidence is of a different kind, to who was the first discoverer of Klondike gold, to what explains how this legless mute man washed up on the shore of Acadia in 1864 with no legs, and unable to explain how he got there. So it's a whole variety of different kind of mysteries. Some obscure, some like the death of the artist Tom Thompson, who drowned in Canoe Lake. But was it a murder? Was it an accident? Was it a suicide? There are all kinds of different mysteries. But I do think you can frame almost any, World War I. How did it get started? Why did it last so long? These are all questions. And if you frame them as questions and you give students the tools to help answer them, they get engaged and want to solve the mystery.
And there's also, and so yes, this is all fitting in really nicely with this new movement in educational theory, which is allowing students to critically engage with the materials. It's part of constructivist learning theory that in order to actually learn something, students have to engage and somehow get involved in the process of creating knowledge. And as it happens, our mystery fit right in that, and for the all the same reasons. People are more interested when they're more engaged. They care more. It matters more to them, and they do a better job of learning and thinking critically, and also thinking historically.
And so, what has you touched on it a little bit, but what has the reaction from students and teachers been who are implementing these mysteries in their classrooms? Are people, obviously the project's gone on for a long time, so there's obviously some sort of positive reaction to it, but in general, what is the feedback that you get?
Well, we find it's used in classrooms from elementary school right through high school, most intensively in high school classes. Almost every university in Canada, I would say.
It's used at the undergraduate level. It's used at the graduate level.
It's we can check the URLs of the computers that log in, and they come from over 50 countries.
Wow.
And on any given day, on average, in the last 2 or 3 years, more than 2,500 students are using our website.
Wow.
Every day through
Every
the year,
day.
using one of the mysteries.
Yeah, so we've been amazed and astonished that when this was started in 1997, and it was quite novel, but, this is now, what's the year? 2015?
Yeah.
And it's still, with the number of people who are using the sites continues to grow. We get requests for teachers' guides, continue to get those from across the country and beyond. Because the websites are all in French and English, we have a large audience in French-speaking Africa, for example.
Oh, okay.
Even though Canada, the United States, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand are our main sources, but we've been amazed, right? that the web, which can be so ephemeral, that this set of mysteries has proved to be so so rich for so many people. And I think it's because they were all developed by historians who have deep historical knowledge. It's extremely deep in terms of the archive of evidence that we've created for each one. So I know that teachers will use, for example, the Salt Spring mystery or the Klatsasine about the Chilcotin War. Like, they'll go and they'll use the documents for other things that they want to use in their classrooms as well, to illustrate other things about native settler relations or about politics. Because when we selected the mysteries, which is now 13, and then an educational website separately, we wanted to make sure that what we selected was not only interesting with a really good hook and a really good rich base of documents, but we also wanted to make sure that it spanned geographically the entire country from east to west to north, and we wanted to make sure that it spanned through time. But also, really, really important, we wanted to make sure that as a whole, this project covers what we think of and what Canadian historians identify as key themes in Canadian history. And also, of course, world history and other things. So we have, native, non-native relations. We have colonial relations. We have the legless man was a really nice look at disability, ability and disability, and how that was handled at different times through Canadian history. We've got the Doukhobors and Peter Berrigan and an act of terrorism in 1923. So we really wanted it to be a go-to site for Canadian history generally. And what I would love to see, actually, is to see a university professor use it as the Canadian history course.
Right.
Because there's 13 weeks.
I talked to a colleague at the Congress, and I won't name her, but she teaches at Wilfrid Laurier University, and that's what she does.
You're kidding! Oh, that's fantastic. So because we don't, it's there for anybody to use. There's no advertising. There's no cost to it because of the funding that we were able to get from Heritage Canada and this for the Franklin expedition from Shirk. So that's been wonderful.
But given the great diversity of material on the site, obviously that would go beyond both of your immediate research ranges and interest, right? So, in terms of the methodology of this, what is the process of putting together the various mysteries? How do you go about researching it?
So the first one was more happenstance. Ruth and I were working on the project, and we did have some expertise. The second one, second set of mysteries, once we decided that it was a good project and some of the feedback we got was that it was way too hard for students to make a narrative out of these disparate sources, and so we thought the reason to go to a larger project was to provide scaffolding and educational material to train people up to be able to do these more complex tasks. So we moved to phase 2, where we had 2 new mysteries, and we invited another scholar, Peter Gossage, who was an expert on a particular mystery, and we also invited him to become a co-director of the project, so now we're 3 co-directors. And I did one mystery on the Chilcotin War, which is one of my areas of study. But we realized there that what was necessary, as Ruth said, was the historical depth. So for the next phases and the next 10 mysteries, we put out a call for mysteries across the profession, and people proposed them, and we chose experts in the field who had a research budget and led the research teams then.
Okay.
And who already had done a lot of the research, had got that rich evidentiary base, because so much of the materials, educational materials on the web, you can't really. It's very difficult to pay anybody to get. It's very, very expensive to pay people to do research. So what we did is that we sort of piggybacked on the fact that there were a lot of historians out there who have, a pet project or something they're interested in. They've already done the research for the most part. Everybody did more research to sort of bring stuff together, but for the most part, that's what they did. So they more or less volunteered their time and their expertise and what they had done, and that was so for each of the research directors, they were in charge of that.
And so today we're here at Library and Archives Canada, and you're launching the Franklin exhibition mystery. So there's been a lot of attention on the Franklin exhibition recently after they founded. And there was an exhibit here, actually, in the lobby of Library and Archives Canada for a while that the Science and Tech Museum had done. That was on display here. So, how long has this mystery been in production, and when did this idea of putting a Franklin exhibition together come about?
Well, it was actually proposed by Ruth, Sandwell, and Lyle Dick, and Lyle ended up being Lyle's a historian with Parks Canada. Has been in the meantime the president of the Canadian Historical Association. Long experience as a researcher of the Arctic North, and he and Ruth proposed this mystery to us. About 3 years ago? 4 years ago.
About 4 years ago. Even, it might have, about 4 years ago.
And they were able to come up with a little seed money, and that allowed us to do a little background work. We applied to SSHRC, and we want to give a shout out to SSHRC, who funded this phase as a partnerships grant with Parks Canada and the Department of Nunavut and the LAC.
Yeah, the Department of Education in Nunavut has been a huge part of this, so we've been working with them. Nunavut, the Nunavut government is coincidentally just beginning to create their own curriculum in social studies. Wow. So we were able to, the participation of Nunavut educators, teachers, and people from the Department of Education has been a really important part of our developing the educational materials around the site. So that's been a very exciting part. They're actually creating one of the teacher's guides for the site that fits in with their curriculum objectives. It can also be used by other jurisdictions as well. But that's very exciting, and we've also created, as we always have, so each of the mysteries has not only some scaffolding activities, but it's got a full teacher's guide with a unit plan, at least one unit plan for one or more levels. And then it also has short lesson plans called mystery quests, which are based on the WebQuest model. So they're very student-centered. We give them just maybe 5 or 6 documents rather than 145, and even more focused question. Right. So there's and there are 5 new ones for the Franklin expedition.
So it's a very collaborative process.
It's become that way over the years. I mean, in every instance, we've had a partner researcher and partner museums and other research institutions have helped out. But as the project has evolved, it's kind of moved into more of a community-engaged project, and so that's been exciting. We've evolved, if you like, with the profession in that regard.
And with respect to this particular one, the Franklin exhibition, if you proposed it 3 or 4 years ago, when they found the
Erebus, though, on the Franklin ships.
Right. So how did that change your process, or did you have to add things and change what you had originally planned, I imagine?
Yeah, it's interesting. The mystery of the Franklin expedition, and we call the website the Franklin Mystery: Life and Death in the Arctic. And part of it is to focus on the life of the Inuit in the Arctic at the time that Franklin met them. So it's a little bit different, I think, from a lot of the coverage of Franklin, because we want to pay attention to the Inuit world as well as the European world that they met. And one of the main mystery is, how did it fail? This is Britain's kind of most scientifically advanced, best equipped expedition to the Arctic ever. The latest scientific equipment disappears, all hands die. But we did think about one of the sub-mysteries is what happened to the ships. And then about 3 years in, a year before our launch, we had actually, the website was done a year ago. Essentially, we've been working on pedagogical materials and translation for the last year. That mystery was partly solved, and one of the ships had been found. But in retrospect, it's generated an enormous amount of excitement about the Franklin mystery and international attention to the mystery. And in a way, it's a minor part of the mysteries we wanted to solve, but it opens all kinds of new questions, because the ship was found intact, which means it wasn't crushed in the ice. And so, could people have lived on that ship until until the very end? Many things.
Yeah, and a really important part of the work, I think, of the website is the Inuit voices that we hear, because the Inuit. 2 search and rescue operations went to the Arctic in the late 1860s and the late 1870s, and talked extensively with the Inuit in that area. And the Inuit had actually seen the Franklin ships, had found the bodies, had found all kinds of other. So it was the Inuit testimony that allowed later expeditions to come and actually find the sad remains of the little trail of cairns along the coast as they buried, or they couldn't bury, they put them in cairns. And then finally the last ones who could not be buried because they all died, and they found their skeletons. Again, using this Inuit evidence, the skeletons in the the boat that they were trying to drag to get to
Right.
open water. And actually, there's been a lot of press coverage, and this will be talked about today at our launch, about the Inuit evidence that went to finding the Erebus in September of this of 2014.
So it's really a different way of looking at this whole thing, because I mean, the press coverage has always been, let's find the ship, and
Yes.
the ship. And so this is really looking at it more as the totality of the
This-
experience that these guys had in the
Yeah.
north.
And finding the ship only, I think, deepens that mystery in certain ways. And as Ruth says, it actually verifies some Inuit testimony that seemed pretty sketchy until the ship was found way south of where people expected it to be. And it was found by accident, actually, because they tried to look where they thought it would be in the north, and the ice was too thick, so they kind of got kicked south and just had that kind of look around, and found it where the Inuit, more or less, these oral histories are always a bit general, but more or less said they would find it. And that opens up a whole new interest in the credibility of other things the Inuit testimony has to offer.
So you two have to go and actually do this launch.
Yeah.
But before you go, just let's direct people to the site. Where can they go to find the different
In English,
things?
it's www.canadianmysteries.ca, and they'll find all 13, including the new Franklin mystery there now. If they go right now, it's just about to be unveiled. And it's also available in French as canadianmysteries.ca. Here's my French for you. So,
And we will link to that at the site when we post this. So,
Okay,
Ruth Sandwell, John Lutz, thank you so much.
thanks for doing this.
Thanks for doing it.
So my thanks to Ruth Sandwell and John Lutz, and be sure to check out the Franklin Exhibition Mystery and all the Canadian mysteries. It's a really good resource out there. So my thanks to them, and please be sure to check it out. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, it's historyslam@gmail.com. Twitter is @Dr. Shawnee Fever. And if you're out and you see Enrico Palazzo, please say hi for me.
Thanks for listening to the History Slam podcast. Be sure to check out Active History for more features, articles, and be sure to subscribe on iTunes.